A stern decree names Celeste Golding, charging her for the crime of acting illegally. The accusations continue, pinpointing her forbidden use of the stellar beast speaker. The absolute sentence is handed down, condemning the young girl to death. Flashing back a decade, the bustling cityscape hides a tragic past. Somber silhouettes gather outside a grand estate, mourning a profound loss. Mourners lament a brave man who died fighting magical beasts, leaving his little girl behind. Whispers in the crowd suggest Marquis Golding will take custody of the orphan child. Someone gently addresses the somber young lady Celeste. A heavyset man demands to know if she grasps the gravity of her situation. Looking at her vacant, wide eyes, the onlookers pity the poor thing. Suddenly, the sharp crash of a dropping vase shatters the gloomy silence. Startled maids rush toward the disturbance, frantic to know what went wrong. A young girl quickly points the blame, shouting that her sister Celeste dropped the vase. Feigning innocence, the girl excuses Celeste's lack of manners due to her grief, begging her mother to forgive the clumsy act. The mother fawns over her sweet Muriel instead, completely ignoring Celeste's quiet denial. Hidden behind an embrace, a malicious smirk crosses the young girl's face. Tears welling in her eyes, a confused Celeste desperately wonders what is going on and where her father is. Her inner monologue introduces Nudesia, a kingdom deeply beloved by powerful stellar beasts. Celeste reflects on her tragic timeline, having lost her mother shortly after birth and her father at age 8. She remembers bitter words blaming a man named Phil Hazeldine for her father's death. The heavy atmosphere stifles her as she stands frozen in her new, unwelcome reality. Her uncle tightly grips her shoulders, instructing her to calmly say yes to whatever is asked. To her horror, she is formally betrothed to Colonel Phil Hazeldine, the very man who caused her father's demise. The terrifying arrangement grants the colonel the title of Earl Ainsworth and the position of Supreme Commander upon their marriage. Overwhelmed by dread, a small, desperate plea of denial escapes her lips. Celeste breaks down completely, dropping to her knees with a heartbroken scream. The young colonel kneels gracefully, apologizing for dragging her into this terrifying mess. Celeste recalls this fateful encounter as the day she met the colonel at just 10 years old. Time skips forward, and Muriel mockingly notes that Celeste's engagement was eventually refused. Muriel continues her taunts, sarcastically adding that they looked like a perfectly good match. Celeste simply grips her quill, questioning the idea of marriage under her breath. Brushing off the mockery, a tutor pivots the conversation to a lesson about the stellar beasts. The tutor explains that these creatures appear in countless books, making them famous to everyone in the country. According to ancient lore, there were far more of these magical beasts during the Age of Legends. Over time their numbers dwindled, leaving only 7 confirmed beasts to be officially ranked 100 years ago. Currently, only 3 beasts possess masters, especially after the top-ranked Sirius vanished during the previous king's reign. The records detail that Mimosa belongs to Duke Wayne, while the 3rd-ranked Altair is bound to Crown Prince Josiah. Turning the page, they read that the 7th-ranked Regulus is mastered by none other than Colonel Phil Hazeldine. Hearing his name reignites Celeste's trauma, reminding her that this man caused her father's death. Despite her lingering bitterness, she suddenly recalls the surprising warmth and kindness of his hand. Celeste mutters her father's name, her mind still anchored in the past. Snapping her back to reality, the tutor demands to know the current whereabouts of the remaining stellar beasts, adding that even a child should know the answer. Stealing the spotlight, Muriel proudly states that the remaining beasts are said to be slumbering inside the star chamber. The tutor nods, explaining that noble children carry divine star power in their blood and must participate in the selection ceremony when they turn 11. Looking directly at the girls, she notes that during this crucial moment, even they might be chosen by one of the legendary stellar beasts. Later, Muriel buries her face in her mother's lap, whining that it is awful for the middle-class teacher to treat her as an equal to Celeste. Gossiping in the hallway, the maids scoff at the unbelievable fact that Celeste is actually Lady Muriel's cousin. Overhearing the commotion, Muriel's mother sneers that a noble stellar beast would never choose a girl like her anyway. Standing silently outside the heavy door, Celeste listens to the tutor declare that teaching her star power techniques is a complete waste of time. Retreating to the cold solitude of her room, Celeste buries her face in her pillows and cries herself to sleep. Morning breaks, and she fiercely wipes the lingering tears from her eyes, stealing her resolve. She grips her dress and vows to forge her own path, realizing she must become the person she is truly meant to be. Carrying a heavy stack of books through the empty halls, she accepts the harsh reality that her father is no longer here to protect her. Studying relentlessly by candlelight, she acknowledges the bitter truth that no one is coming to save her anymore. Watching a servant haul luggage away, she realizes that getting expelled from the estate would mean she simply won't survive. Immersing herself in ancient texts, she focuses entirely on unlocking the secrets of divine star power. Closing her eyes to concentrate her bubbling magic, she knows she must master the power needed to tame stellar beasts. A glass rattles on the table as her aura flares, building her strength for the pivotal moment she turns 11. A memory surfaces of her younger self reaching out to a glowing, hedgehog-like creature, hoping she might be chosen by a stellar beast. The surrounding nobles look on in absolute awe, whispering about how amazing the magical spectacle is. Young Celeste gazes at the radiant creature named Speaker, marveling at its beautiful name and pleading for it to choose her. Tears of joy prick her eyes as she presses her forehead against the creature, embracing her very own stellar beast. Snuggling deeply into Speaker's warm fur, she finds immense comfort in knowing she is no longer alone. Hugging Speaker tightly, she realizes that while words might fail, stellar beasts have hearts that connect through pure emotion. The warm memory is violently shattered as a sharp, sudden realization snaps her back to the harsh present. A terrifying tremor suddenly shakes the ground, throwing her entirely off balance. Absolute panic sets in, prompting her to desperately scream Speaker's name. Ignoring her fear, she scrambles to her feet and races toward the source of the danger to protect her companion. Sprinting into the courtyard, she throws herself over Speaker to shield it, completely ignoring Muriel watching coldly from a nearby window. Panting heavily, she gently strokes the frightened beast, trying to calm its spiked quills and soothe its terror. Sitting alone in the vast grassy field, she creates a protective barrier of warmth around her beloved companion. Suddenly, a massive shadow falls over them, accompanied by a heavy, intimidating military presence. A stern, mustached officer glares down at her, his face locked in an unforgiving, authoritative scowl. The air grows impossibly thick with tension as armed soldiers close in on her from all sides. Celeste gasps sharply, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief at the unfolding chaos. A nearby soldier hastily asks if Lady Celeste is all right, prompting her to nervously confirm that she is. Armored knights quickly step in front of her, drawing their heavy weapons to form a protective wall against an unseen threat. Riding atop a fierce warhorse, a commanding officer orders his men to raise their swords and hold the line, roaring that their sole mission is to exterminate the demonic beasts. Pointing his blade toward the massive enemy, he unleashes his own terrifying power, commanding Regulus to strike. The sheer force of the beast's roar sends shockwaves through the air, but Celeste firmly plants her feet to protect Speaker from the devastation. A sharp blade swiftly cuts through the tense air. An officer praises her excellent performance, asking if she is accustomed to fighting alongside stellar beasts. Celeste looks up in surprise, recognizing General Hazeldine standing before her. He commends her brilliant leadership during the operation, though she humbly deflects the high praise. The general warmly admits that her incredible performance even swept him up in the momentum. Flustered by the overwhelming compliment, she stammers that such a thing is absolutely impossible. Hazeldine simply laughs off her embarrassment, clarifying that he was merely praising her abilities. He smiles gently, noting that her clear bond with Speaker proves their deep connection. Celeste quietly agrees, admitting that the stellar beast is the only family she has left. The warm memory shatters as a judge harshly sentences Celeste to death for illegally exploiting a stellar beast. Kneeling on the cold floor, she stares in absolute shock at the unforgiving court. Across the grand hall, a familiar figure steps forward into the harsh light. A malicious smirk graces Muriel's face as she confidently holds Speaker in her arms. Horrified, Celeste screams Speaker's name, desperately wondering why Muriel holds her beloved stellar beast. Panicking, she throws her hands out and desperately pleads that this is all a massive misunderstanding. She directs her frantic appeals toward the towering figure of the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince coldly declares that this situation perfectly embodies an unlawful method of taming stellar beasts. He glares down at Celeste with utter disgust, completely ignoring her desperate, tearful pleas. Trapped in Muriel's grip, poor Speaker trembles helplessly under the oppressive atmosphere of the courtroom. The frightened stellar beast lets out a pained cry as it struggles against its captor. Muriel sneers at her sister, mocking Celeste's desperate and disgusting attempts to reclaim the beast. Flaunting her stolen prize, Muriel boasts that her superior knowledge and star power make her the true master. She cruelly flips the narrative, accusing Celeste of being the one who unjustly exploited the creature. Outraged, Celeste furiously fires back that true worthiness cannot be determined by such blatantly unfair standards. She begs the Crown Prince to consult General Hazeldine, insisting the third-ranked Tamer must understand the truth. Muriel proudly interrupts, boasting that the Crown Prince has already acknowledged her as the rightful master. Stepping out from the shadows, her uncle glares down at Celeste with venomous eyes. He coldly reminds her that he generously cared for her when she was left completely alone. Narrowing his eyes, he demands to know if she truly intends to betray House Golding. Vowing to erase this disgrace, he prepares to violently sever Speaker's impure bond with a false master. He raises his glowing hand, gathering lethal magical energy to strike down the helpless creature. Terror grips Celeste's heart as she screams at the top of her lungs for him to stop. Desperate tears stream down her face as she wildly begs the Crown Prince to spare Speaker. The Crown Prince mutters in disgust, claiming her vile power will only defile the noble beast. Without warning, a devastating burst of magical energy violently crashes into Celeste's fragile body. She violently coughs up blood, letting out an agonizing gasp as the crushing attack lands. Collapsing onto the cold stone floor, she slowly bleeds out before her uncaring family. Weak and dying, she faintly whispers the Crown Prince's title with her last, failing breath. He looks down apathetically, remarking what a terrible pity it is that she committed such a crime. As her vision fades to black, Celeste finally accepts the cruel reality of her complete betrayal. Celeste whispers the name of her beloved stellar beast as tragedy violently unfolds. She struggles frantically to process the devastating reality actively surrounding her. Utter disbelief washes over the young woman as she bears witness to the horrifying event. Crushing guilt heavily shatters her spirit as she recognizes her complete helplessness. Weeping softly, she bitterly apologizes for entirely failing to protect her dear companion. Her mind rapidly drifts to a bittersweet memory of General Hazeldine promising a peaceful getaway after their grueling military campaign. She vividly visualizes the breathtakingly scenic destination he had once described to her. The dying beast emits a low, pained groan while she imagines them finally finding peace together. Celeste remembers deeply dreaming of a peaceful future shared equally alongside Speaker and Regulus. Tears stream relentlessly down her face as the grim present violently shatters her fragile dreams. Agonized groans fill the blood-stained air as she tearfully repeats her endless apologies to the fading creature. The devastating weight of the profound tragedy fully settles upon her trembling shoulders. Clutching onto her brightest memories, she pours out her boundless love for her beast. Absolute darkness slowly begins to claim the frayed edges of her fading consciousness. A heavy and profound silence mercilessly overtakes the chaotic battlefield. She softly whispers a final, tender farewell to her dearest Speaker. Reflecting on her complicated childhood, she recalls the General's initial hesitance and intense fear toward her. Distant memories of their early, awkward interactions flash vividly through her fading mind. She admits to herself that General Hazeldine always stood as a highly respected role model among the elite beast tamers. Softening her hardened view, she realizes she eventually came to see him as a fiercely protective older brother. A profound sense of loss deeply intertwines with her lingering, unspoken romantic feelings. Intense regret violently pierces her dying heart as she ponders the monumental choices she failed to make. Wondering about an alternate fate, she questions what life would have been like if she had actually married him back then. A bittersweet smile crosses her face as she imagines that alternate reality might have been truly beautiful. The desperate, burning wish for a second chance echoes loudly within her fading soul. Her final conscious thought clings fiercely to the tragic regret of utterly rejecting that life-altering marriage. Suddenly, a sharp gasp escapes her lips as she abruptly snaps back to full consciousness. Complete bewilderment strikes her as she realizes she is somehow still breathing and alive. Hearing a sudden noise, she frantically cries out for her beloved Speaker. Taking in her immediate surroundings, she discovers herself trapped in an eerily familiar yet impossible environment. Unseen voices echo outside the room, cheerfully announcing the celebration of Lady Muriel's 10th birthday. The voice firmly dictates that the young lady's palace staff must remain completely undisturbed under any circumstances. A nervous servant stammers a quick, fearful agreement to the incredibly strict orders. Freezing in absolute shock, Celeste quietly repeats the completely impossible age of her cruel cousin. Racing in a panic toward a mirror, she desperately examines her own reflection to confirm her wildest suspicions. Staring blankly at her own small hands and youthful face, her mind completely short-circuits. Struck by the impossible truth, she frantically questions why she has somehow regressed entirely back into her childhood body. Celeste gasps in panic, frantically questioning the meaning behind Speaker's sudden disappearance. She urgently checks her body for the familiar, magical connection that bound them together. Horror washes over her as she discovers that the stellar beast's sacred seal has completely vanished from her skin. Reaching out into the void, she desperately screams Speaker's name upon realizing she can no longer feel his comforting presence. Confusion clouds her mind as she calculates that jumping back 10 years places her right before she ever met her beloved beast. She clutches her head, struggling violently to differentiate between past reality and the terrifying visions haunting her. Paranoia sets in as she wonders if meeting Speaker was the true nightmare or if everything before was merely a dark dream. Overwhelmed by intense grief and chronological displacement, she cries out for her lost companion once more. A sudden, sharp realization forces her out of her spiraling panic and back to the present moment. Startled by the echoing memories, she quickly attempts to gather her scattered and terrified senses. Recalling the servant's earlier whispers, she pieces together that today is supposedly her cousin Muriel's 10th birthday. A stunning revelation hits her as she realizes she has regressed exactly 8 years, landing on the day just before she turned 10. Staring blankly ahead, she absorbs the impossible, crushing weight of reliving this highly specific and miserable day. The bedroom door swings open abruptly as a young Muriel arrogantly demands to know why her sister is still sleeping. The spoiled cousin harshly scolds Celeste for her improper behavior, berating her for not being dressed by noon. Hiding her total disbelief at witnessing the exact same events from 8 years ago, Celeste quietly apologizes and claims to feel unwell. Muriel tilts her head haughtily, instantly skeptical of the sudden, convenient illness. Ignoring Celeste's obvious discomfort, the vain girl selfishly pivots the conversation to show off her brand new, beautiful dress. Muriel maliciously explains she brought the dress solely to taunt Celeste, knowing her cousin is banned from the party as punishment for neglecting her studies. Celeste internally brushes off the fabricated punishment, easily recognizing the deeply familiar, cruel tactics of her youth. Maintaining a completely passive facade, Celeste politely thanks Muriel for coming all the way to her room to display the lovely garment. Muriel immediately bristles at the emotionless response, angrily accusing Celeste of feigning sickness for undue pity. With a cruel sneer, the spoiled cousin spitefully declares that no one will fall for the act because everyone in the household truly hates her. Unfazed by the childish venom, Celeste calmly assures her cousin that she has absolutely no intention of ruining the birthday party. Furious that she failed to elicit a reaction, Muriel storms out while shouting that Celeste's mere presence makes the entire mansion gloomy. Left completely alone in the quiet room, Celeste inspects her flawless skin, confirming the absolute absence of her previous fatal wounds and pain. Absolute certainty solidifies in her mind as she fully accepts the impossible truth that time has completely reversed itself. Staring at her small hands, she silently wonders if Speaker was the one who miraculously saved her by sending her back to this 10-year-old body. Empowered by this unbelievable second chance, she fiercely vows to protect Speaker and finally live a life of absolute freedom. Steeling her newfound resolve, she knows she must immediately formulate a foolproof escape plan. She realizes that her absolute top priority is finding a definitive way to permanently leave the suffocating grip of the Marquis household. Analyzing the treacherous political landscape, she concludes that her status-obsessed uncle would never willingly cast out his late brother's daughter. A dark realization dawns on her that if she reawakens as a stellar beast user, her uncle will absolutely exploit her power and never let her leave. Desperately searching her memories for a viable loophole, she wonders if she was ever truly given a real chance to escape her golden cage. A sudden spark of inspiration hits her as she recalls a highly pivotal event from when she was 10 years old. Her eyes widen in shock as she directly connects the timeline to the ongoing celebration of Muriel's birthday. Excitement and dread mix perfectly as she remembers that tomorrow marks the exact day she first met General Hazeldine. The deeply imposing name of General Phil Hazeldine echoes heavily through her rejuvenated and calculating mind. She reflects on his legendary status as a brilliant noble who flawlessly commanded the stellar beast Regulus entirely without an official title. Marveling at his unmatched swordsmanship and military prowess, she recognizes that allying with him might be the ultimate key to changing her tragic fate. Soldiers fiercely debate the merits of their national hero, noting that he flawlessly executes the most dangerous magical beast elimination missions. One soldier acknowledges that the nobles deeply despise him, though such resentment is completely unavoidable in their line of work. Rumors swirl that he was supposed to receive the rank of general long ago, alongside the extinct title of Earl Ainsworth. Overhearing the gossiping men, Celeste violently flinches at the mention of her late father's title and wonders why Phil Hazeldine remains untitled. A commanding voice abruptly orders the gossips to shut up, explaining that the hero actively rejected a royal marriage proposal. A sudden voice calls out to Miss Celeste, snapping her back from her deep eavesdropping. Connecting the political dots, she realizes that accepting the marriage would have guaranteed him both the general rank and the extinct Earl title. A heavy guilt washes over her as she remembers that the prospective bride presented to him was merely a 10-year-old child. The intimidating memory of the towering military commander staring down at her youthful self flashes vividly in her mind. The crushing realization hits her that General Hazeldine was essentially forced to reject the advantageous marriage strictly because of her young age. She tightly clenches her trembling hands, bitterly regretting her complete ignorance during that fateful encounter. Tears prick her eyes as she laments understanding absolutely nothing about the massive political stakes resting on her small shoulders. Shaking off her lingering despair, a fierce spark of determination suddenly ignites within her youthful eyes. Calculating that the official proposal happens tomorrow, she hopes that intervening perfectly this time will save him and secure her own escape from the Marquis estate. Steeling her nerves, she resolves to take bold, proactive measures to ensure the critical marriage proposal is not rejected. A sudden wave of paranoia grips her as she briefly fears that her time-traveling regression is merely a dream and the general might not even exist. Pushing through her lingering doubts, she successfully navigates the bustling streets and arrives at the 7th district. Staring up at the towering architecture, she marvels at how incredibly massive and intimidating the world feels from a child's physical perspective. Her breath suddenly hitches as she spots a deeply familiar, broad-shouldered figure strolling down the busy thoroughfare. General Phil Hazeldine walks with an imposing, authoritative aura that commands immediate respect from the surrounding crowds. Utterly paralyzed by his intense presence, the young girl can only stare silently at the formidable military man. The towering commander abruptly pauses his stride, his sharp gaze locking onto the small child standing frozen in his path. Visibly confused by her solitary presence, he cautiously questions why a young child is wandering alone. Gathering every ounce of her remaining courage, Celeste bows gracefully and wishes Lord Hazeldine a good day. Dropping to one knee to meet her eye level, the stern man gently asks if the little girl has lost her way. She formally introduces herself as a daughter of the Marquis Golding family, boldly expressing her immense honor at finally meeting him. Stunned by her impeccable and polite greeting, he respectfully returns the pleasantry while questioning the whereabouts of her escort. His brow furrows in deep concern as he demands to know why a high-ranking noble's daughter is wandering the dangerous streets completely unsupervised. Ignoring his practical concerns, she takes a deep breath and desperately begs him to forgive her incredible suddenness. With burning conviction in her eyes, the 10-year-old girl looks the terrifying commander dead in the face and demands that he marry her. Absolute silence falls between them as Hazeldine stares blankly at the child, completely failing to process the absurd request. Without uttering a single word, the imposing man slowly stands up and casually resumes walking away from the perceived prank. Panic erupts in her chest as she frantically sprints after him, desperately begging the Lord to stop and hear her out. She trails behind his massive strides, passionately shouting that her unbelievable proposal is a matter of absolute importance. A heavy wooden door slams decisively in her face, entirely cutting off her desperate pleas as he disappears into a building. Standing completely alone on the quiet street, she softly whimpers a final, unheard plea at the barricaded entrance. Refusing to accept this quiet defeat, she firmly plants her feet and swears aloud to wait right there until he changes his mind. She stubbornly settles into her vigil, absolutely determined to maintain her position outside his door. Rationalizing her risky escape, she notes that the bustling birthday party back at the estate guarantees no one will notice her prolonged absence. Knowing this is her one and only chance to rewrite destiny, she vows to make him listen before morning forces her retreat. Shivering intensely against the freezing night, Celeste wraps her small arms around herself and mutters about the biting cold. Staring up at the towering figures around her, she realizes just how massively different and intimidating the world feels when viewed from a child's perspective. A comforting memory suddenly echoes in her mind, recalling a gentle voice warmly assuring her not to be afraid. Her train of thought is abruptly shattered by a new arrival who kindly crouches down to ask the little one what is wrong. Startled by the sudden intrusion, she quickly snaps to attention and acknowledges the concerned stranger. The stranger tilts his head in curiosity, casually wondering aloud if she is Lord Hazeldine's younger sister. Shaking her head politely, Celeste explains that she braved the journey simply because she desperately wanted to see the military man. The stranger absorbs this surprising information while staring sympathetically down at the freezing, determined child. Suddenly erupting into a fit of righteous fury, the newcomer turns toward the building and screams out, calling Hazeldine a complete fool. Pounding fiercely on the thick wood, he demands to know how the man could mercilessly abandon a little girl in the freezing cold. Continuing his aggressive assault on the entryway, the furious man angrily orders the military blockhead to open the door immediately. With a heavy, ominous creak, the sturdy wooden door finally slowly pushes open. Phil Hazeldine emerges from the darkened interior, his massive frame instantly dominating the narrow threshold. The angry stranger violently grabs the stoic soldier by the collar, loudly accusing him of borderline child abuse. Bypassing the chaotic scuffle entirely, Celeste quickly apologizes to the general and desperately begs him to hear her out. Looking down at her with a calm demeanor, the towering man gently corrects her by stating he is regretfully only a colonel, not a general. A heavy, breathless silence descends upon the group as the imposing colonel intensely scrutinizes the small girl before him. Refusing to be intimidated by his sharp gaze, the young girl stands completely firm and maintains her unwavering focus. Releasing a weary sigh of recognition, the colonel groans in exasperation upon realizing she is the exact same child from earlier. Softening his harsh stance slightly, he agrees to listen for a brief moment under the strict condition that she drops the absurd marriage proposal. He narrows his eyes and sternly clarifies that he is strictly offering to listen, refusing to promise anything beyond a simple conversation. Celeste gazes up at the formidable military commander, her youthful eyes burning with an intense, undeniable resolve. Crossing his arms, the colonel waits in expectant silence, silently granting her the floor to make her case. Seizing her ultimate chance to rewrite destiny, she confidently declares that they must urgently discuss the mutual trajectory of both their futures. Celeste boldly asks Colonel Hazeldine if he knows he will soon be granted the rank of general and a noble title. Unfazed by her sudden question, he demands to know what the scheduled award ceremony has to do with her. The imposing colonel silently stares down at the small girl, waiting for a coherent explanation. Realizing his complete ignorance, Celeste internally notes that the military leadership has clearly kept him in the dark. She presses forward, explaining that His Majesty is scheduled to personally grant him the title of Earl Ainsworth and a major promotion. Staring him dead in the eyes, she drops the absolute bombshell that this grand reward includes a marriage to her. Scoffing at the absurd idea of an engagement acting as a reward, he bluntly questions her exact age. Maintaining her composure, Celeste reveals that she has just turned 10 years old. Hazeldine dismisses the entire concept as absurd, stating he has received no formal nomination because the royals oppose his elevation. He narrows his eyes in suspicion, questioning her earlier claim of being the daughter of Marquis Golding. Calling her words utter nonsense, he orders her to return home and stop ruining his much-needed military leave. As he attempts to walk away, she desperately begs him to wait and asks if he remembers eliminating the shadow beasts 2 years ago. She stops him dead in his tracks by revealing she is the daughter of the fallen Earl Ainsworth who died in that very battle. The heavy and tragic revelation completely halts the colonel's immediate departure. He turns back to look at the shivering child with a newly softened, deeply contemplative expression. Shedding his harsh demeanor, he removes his heavy military coat and drapes it gently over her freezing shoulders. Shocked by his sudden show of kindness, the young girl quietly thanks him for the unexpected shelter. Wrapped tightly in the oversized garment, she relishes the immense, comforting warmth radiating from the heavy fabric. Hazeldine breaks the quiet silence, asking if Ainsworth was her late father's cherished homeland. She confirms this fact, adding that the local people remain deeply grateful to him for saving them from the monstrous beasts. Continuing her bold explanation, she states the leadership ultimately decided that reviving the Earl Ainsworth title for him was the most fitting reward. A look of sheer disbelief crosses his scarred face as he questions if the common people are truly grateful for his actions. He briefly looks away, his sharp tactical mind rapidly connecting the dots of the massive political snare. He realizes the noble class is actively troubled by his prominent status as a powerful stellar beast user entirely lacking noble origins. Figuring out the trap, he deduces they are deliberately offering him a child so he will voluntarily reject the marriage, title, and rank. He turns his intense gaze back to her, questioning if this elaborate setup is His Majesty's ultimate, humiliating goal. The mood instantly shifts back to hostility as his expression darkens with extreme suspicion. Leaning in close, he demands to know exactly where a small child obtained such highly classified intelligence. He sternly reminds her that top military and political secrets should be completely inaccessible to a little girl in her position. Dismissing her earlier claims entirely, he bluntly declares that her fantastic words lack any shred of credibility. Celeste panics internally, agonizing over her inability to prove her time regression now that her wounds and stellar beast traces are gone. Desperate to maintain her leverage, she decides to falsely claim her knowledge comes from a foresight granted by the divine star. Knowing this is her one and only chance to secure his crucial help, she heavily prepares to sell the dangerous lie. She gazes up at him and asks if he would believe her if she possessed a mystical technique to see the future. Highly skeptical, he questions if she possesses a farsight ability, noting such magic would be instantly detected at headquarters. She shakes her head and clarifies that the closest term for her unique power is a highly specific form of future vision. Hazeldine laughs humorlessly, openly mocking her convenient pivot to mystical visions immediately after failing to provide actual proof. He glares down at the young girl, utterly unimpressed by her desperate and increasingly wild storytelling. He sternly warns her that claiming such unproven powers is a severe crime that historically leads to immediate and brutal arrest. Undeterred by his looming threats, she reminds him the ceremony is tomorrow and desperately begs to know how she can earn his absolute trust. The imposing colonel firmly declares he will only believe her wild claims if her supposed vision actually comes true. Celeste counters boldly, asking what he would think if she revealed a deeply hidden secret that absolutely no one else knows. He crosses his arms, admitting such a revelation would force him to acknowledge her special abilities. A tense, heavy silence falls over the dark street as the young girl carefully prepares her ultimate gambit. Looking down at her expectant face, he challenges her to go ahead and try. She hesitates briefly, nervously searching her memories for the absolute perfect piece of blackmail to use against him. With blunt confidence, she reveals that the fearsome commander possesses a heart-shaped birthmark right on his behind. Hazeldine reels back in sheer shock while Celeste panics internally, briefly fearing she remembered the intimate detail incorrectly. Covering his blushing face in profound embarrassment, he stammers that only his closest confidants were ever supposed to know that. Refusing to let up, she exposes his hatred for onions, love for animals, and deeply embarrassing pet names for his beast. Utterly defeated and deeply mortified, the military hero frantically yells at her to stop talking. Regaining a shred of his shattered composure, he sighs and finally concedes that he is willing to listen to her seriously. A massive wave of relief washes over Celeste as she internally rejoices that her precious memories of Speaker are undeniably real. His tactical mind quickly recovers, leading him to question how a supposed future vision could possibly reveal such awkwardly intimate details. She nervously apologizes for the deeply personal intrusion, admitting she only discovered the hidden birthmark completely by accident. She quickly explains he casually mentioned his food preferences and loudly mumbled the embarrassing pet names in his sleep during a campaign. A small creature peeks out from the shadows, seemingly responding directly to the very nicknames she just exposed. Hazeldine's expression softens considerably as he wonders if their future selves were truly close enough to casually share personal dislikes. She smiles warmly, confirming they were deeply trusted comrades and fellow Stellar Beastmasters serving in the exact same military unit. Gazing up at him with profound admiration, she confesses that she respected him immensely as a highly protective older brother. He pauses in genuine surprise, directly questioning if she was truly a Stellar Beastmaster as well. A bittersweet sadness fills her eyes as she confirms she was supposed to be the bonded master of the highly ranked Speaker. His strategic mind swiftly deduces that officially placing a noble girl under his command served as a highly convenient excuse. Shifting his focus back to the immediate crisis, he sharply asks if her miraculous future vision can be actively repeated. Hoping she finally won his absolute trust, she solemnly admits that triggering the regression again is highly uncertain and entirely unlikely. She grimly accepts the terrifying reality that even if she dies again, there is absolutely no guarantee she will ever return. Hazeldine redirects the conversation to her earlier warning, questioning how accepting this forced marriage will actually benefit his long-term future. She firmly warns him that directly refusing the royal arrangement will deeply anger His Majesty and severely delay his rightful promotion. Furthermore, his bitter political enemies will constantly deploy him on incredibly dangerous, life-threatening suicide missions. She grounds her dire warnings in grim reality, reminding him that she personally fought alongside him in those very same blood-soaked battlefields. Staring intensely at the determined child, he fundamentally questions what could possibly drive her to sacrifice herself in a political marriage. He bitterly reminds her that she is currently nothing more than a disposable tool being cruelly used by the nobility to trap him. Acknowledging her miserable reality, he points out that choosing almost anyone else would have guaranteed her a much easier escape. Leaning in with an intimidating aura, he demands to know the absolute, hidden truth behind her desperate midnight gamble. Her face darkens with an overwhelming grief as she reveals that her beloved Speaker was violently stolen from her. The colonel reacts with violent disbelief, loudly questioning how a bonded stellar beast could ever be forcibly separated from its master. She tragically recalls the horrifying moment an unknown force suddenly compelled Speaker to abandon her entirely against its own will. Enraged by the blatant violation of a Tamer's bond, Hazeldine declares the act completely unforgivable and immediately demands the culprit's name. Her eyes burn with a cold hatred as she names her spoiled cousin, Muriel Brielle Golding, as the primary thief. Delivering the final devastating piece of the puzzle, she reveals that Crown Prince Josiah Nudija was directly complicit in the horrific theft. Stunned by the horrific revelation, the colonel mutters in complete disbelief. He leans in intensely, demanding to know if she witnessed the theft with her own eyes. A vivid memory flashes of the terrifying moment her beast was mercilessly taken. Overwhelming grief twists her young face as the traumatic memories resurface. Tears well up in her trembling eyes as she struggles to maintain her fragile composure. Her voice breaks completely as she softly whispers Speaker's name into the freezing night. Hot tears finally spill down her freezing cheeks as her emotional walls violently shatter. A massive, gloved hand suddenly reaches out toward the weeping child. The hardened soldier gazes down at her with a remarkably softened and empathetic expression. Urging her to stay calm, he gently promises that he will finally listen to her. She looks up through her tears, profoundly struck by his unexpected kindness. A heavy silence settles between them as she slowly regains her scattered breath. He deduces she fled her abusive home simply to seek desperately needed refuge with him. He challenges her naive assumption that tomorrow's marriage will actually guarantee a peaceful life. He bitterly explains the ruling class will always view him as a burdensome outsider. She panics internally as he points out the marriage might spark direct conflict with the prince. Crushing doubt consumes her as she wonders what their forced future would have actually entailed. She reassures him that in her timeline, he safely fulfilled his military duties with absolute honor. Horrified by her own selfishness, she realizes she might be the true cause of his misery. She recoils in terror, realizing her desperate attempt to save him was entirely self-serving. She abruptly apologizes for her selfish intrusion and attempts to flee before he shouts for her to wait. He demands to know why she sought him out if she had entirely lost hope. He firmly reminds her that she previously viewed him as a protective older brother. He gently commands the 10-year-old girl to stop acting strong and speak from her heart. Softening his tone, he assures her that children are completely forgiven for simply seeking protection. His tender words instantly shatter the last of her heavy emotional defenses. She tearfully begins to speak about the painful loss of her beloved father. A choked sob escapes her as she confesses that her father never came home again. She recounts enduring profound loneliness, stubbornly believing he would eventually return to her. Her voice cracks violently as she admits she waited endlessly for a ghost. She confesses she is entirely alone and desperately terrified of the abusive Golding estate. She weeps that she merely wanted a warm future alongside Speaker, her only true family. Looking up with desperate, pleading eyes, she begs to borrow his immense strength. Completely broken, the tiny child loudly sobs and begs the massive commander to save her. Hazeldine watches the devastated orphan crumble entirely under the crushing weight of her trauma. She internally realizes she was always just a terrified child completely overwhelmed by her cruel reality. Endless tears stream down her face as she fully surrenders to her profound grief. Stripped of all her desperate scheming, her ultimate desire crystallizes in her mind. She truly only ever wanted someone to swoop in and miraculously save her. Hazeldine deduces the royals hid the engagement to prevent him from planning his refusal. The colonel firmly declares he will believe her wild claims and officially accept the royal engagement. He playfully reveals his own stellar beast has actually been relentlessly pestering him to agree. He gently observes that the young girl seems uniquely and profoundly beloved by all stellar beasts. He notes it is incredibly rare for his cautious beastzu to open his heart so quickly. Overwhelmed by his life-saving mercy, Celeste tearfully whispers her absolute and profound gratitude. He solemnly vows to dedicate his entire arsenal of knowledge, power, and titles entirely to her protection. She apologizes for tethering him, but he dismisses it by noting he expected to live alone anyway. He gently asks if officially inheriting her late father's legendary name tomorrow brings her any comfort. A tiny, hopeful smile graces her lips as she offers a simple, tearful affirmation. The crushing weight of her trauma finally begins to lift from her fragile, exhausted shoulders. He respectfully asks to hear her name one more time to ensure he never forgets it. Wiping away her lingering tears, the small child softly introduces herself as Celeste. The towering military hero respectfully bows, declaring it an absolute honor to finally meet Celeste. A profound and unbreakable new alliance solidifies quietly beneath the freezing midnight sky. They stand united in the dark, fully prepared to completely rewrite their doomed destinies. A lone figure walks quietly through the dark city streets. Celeste continues her determined journey back home under the night sky. A gentle memory echoes as a voice asks if she will be all right on her own. She firmly responds to the memory that she will be absolutely fine alone. The Grand Marquis estate eventually looms menacingly in the dark distance. She successfully sneaks back onto the opulent estate grounds entirely unnoticed. She sighs in heavy relief, glad she managed to buy her item at the last moment. Suddenly, a deeply familiar shadow appears in the darkened hallway. Muriel steps out of the gloom and coldly calls out to her sister. Celeste freezes entirely, silently assessing her cruel cousin's sudden appearance. Masking her panic, Celeste calmly asks Muriel if the birthday party has ended. Muriel haughtily explains it is only proper to change outfits for the upcoming evening banquet. Celeste subtly tries to dismiss her, suggesting Muriel should quickly return to the festivities. Muriel brushes off the suggestion, noting her parents are handling the important guests. The spoiled cousin leans in closer with a highly suspicious and piercing glare. Muriel aggressively interrogates her, revealing the head chef confirmed Celeste never visited the kitchen. Maintaining absolute composure, Celeste coldly states she would never visit a place like the kitchen. Muriel lets out a highly frustrated sigh at the infuriatingly polite deflection. Heavy tension thickens the air as the two young girls silently stare each other down. When pressed about her whereabouts during the party, Celeste simply claims she went for a walk. Confronted about her fake illness, Celeste smoothly deflects by claiming she didn't want to disturb anyone. Muriel squints intensely, clearly unsatisfied with the flawlessly polite excuse. Celeste maintains a perfectly blank expression, giving absolutely nothing away. Ending the tense conversation, Celeste excuses herself to rest while wishing Muriel a good party. Muriel attempts to angrily stop her but quickly falters. Celeste swiftly turns her back and confidently walks away from the petty confrontation. Furious at the dismissal, Muriel bitterly demands to know if Celeste has anything else to say. Celeste pauses momentarily but completely ignores the desperate, childish bait. Safely back in her dark room, the exhausted girl finally lets out a heavy breath. Collapsing onto her bed, she realizes her fate now entirely depends on believing in the Colonel. The scene shifts as a busy maid hums while making intense morning preparations. A maid adjusts a corset, noting they must not tie it too tightly to prevent fainting. Celeste sits completely passive while being aggressively dressed in formal aristocratic attire. The heavy makeup and restrictive clothing purposely make her look far older than 10. Her cruel aunt strictly commands her to refer to them as mother and father today. Celeste obediently bows her head and calmly agrees to the deeply demeaning demand. The aunt glares down menacingly and asks if she knows a man named Phil Hazeldine. Celeste flatly recites his official title as the master of the 7th-ranked stellar beast Regulus. The older woman scoffs loudly in bitter disdain at the perfectly accurate answer. Leaning in maliciously, the aunt once again falsely insists Hazeldine is the reason her father died. The abusive aunt issues a stern, commanding warning for Celeste to remember her place. Sitting silently in the carriage, Celeste reflects on the dark lies constantly fed to her. Celeste bravely counters that Lord Hazeldine was actually the heroic savior of her father's province. The aunt sneers, sharply questioning if that foolish notion came from her low-class teacher. Celeste quickly denies the accusation to protect her beloved tutor from the aunt's wrath. She nervously lies about reading the hero's true exploits in a standard daily newspaper. The aunt furiously weaves a lie, claiming the hateful man deliberately let her father die. She venomously insists he selfishly stole the glory by defeating an already exhausted beast. Celeste clenches her fists tightly, knowing internally that these malicious claims are completely false. She recalls the established truth that the state completely failed to send timely reinforcements. Celeste realizes her manipulative uncle assumed a gullible child would believe anything without question. A heavy wave of regret washes over her as she remembers previously believing those lies. The Grand Royal Palace finally comes into view after what feels like an eternity. The ornate carriage slowly pulls into the massive courtyard of the towering royal estate. She reflects on how intensely unfamiliar the grand front entrance feels to her now. Staring upward, the massive palace resembles a terrifying beast ready to swallow her whole. Opulent nobles and heavily armored guards line the grand hallways of the royal court. Celeste walks silently beside her commanding aunt through the sea of whispering aristocrats. Judgmental gazes heavily track the young girl as she approaches the royal throne room. Hushed, mocking whispers ripple through the elite crowd as they notice the young child. Arrogant nobles sneer and sarcastically compliment the tiny representative of the Marquis family. Gripping her dress tightly, Celeste silently reassures herself that everything will work out perfectly. Her aunt harshly grabs her shoulder and demands absolute silence before the king. The older woman strictly orders the child to only answer yes to any royal questions. She violently threatens Celeste to behave perfectly and avoid shaming House Golding's name. Blanking her expression entirely, the young girl mechanically agrees to the cruel demands. The massive doors slowly swing open to reveal the intimidating majesty of the throne. Everyone in the vast room immediately bows their heads in absolute respect and submission. The imposing king sits heavily upon his ornate throne, gazing down at the assembly. A young, sharp-eyed boy stands proudly right beside the royal monarch's towering seat. Celeste quickly locks eyes with the young royal, instantly recognizing his deeply arrogant face. A massive jolt of pure terror strikes her as she identifies the young crown prince. She stares in horror, realizing the future tyrant is currently just a young boy. Panic floods her mind as she realizes she completely forgot he was present today. She trembles violently, realizing her original memories completely missed his dangerous, looming presence. She bitterly curses her past self for being too overwhelmed to notice her true enemies. Disgust churns in her stomach as she desperately wishes to entirely avoid the monstrous prince. The booming voice of the king abruptly calls out Colonel Hazeldene's name across the hall. The monarch formally dictates his decree to supposedly reward the great military hero. The king publicly announces the deeply insulting marriage arrangement to the tiny, 10-year-old girl. The king formally announces the reward, granting the title of Earl Ainsworth, its lands, and the rank of general. A noble mutters in sheer shock, noting they are surprisingly still in the middle of the coronation ceremony. The massive crowd murmurs in complete disbelief as Hazeldine stands absolutely frozen before the royal throne. The imposing king glares down expectantly at the completely silent colonel. A nervous noble prompts Hazeldine to speak, reminding him this is a direct reward from His Majesty. Growing impatient, the king loudly demands that the documents be signed immediately. A panicked royal attendant scrambles to quickly bring the official paperwork forward. Hazeldine finally speaks up, politely asking the royal court to forgive his apparent rudeness. The king interrupts aggressively, fiercely demanding to know if the colonel intends to refuse the royal decree. Steeling his resolve, Hazeldine immediately bows deeply before the highly imposing monarch. He smoothly covers his hesitation by claiming he was simply overwhelmed by such an incredibly great honor. Kneeling respectfully, he officially accepts the grand reward with profound and deep gratitude. The newly promoted general promises to serve the kingdom in a manner fully worthy of his high position. With his head bowed in submission, he solemnly swears his unwavering loyalty to the throne. Satisfied with the submission, the king shifts his intense gaze away from the kneeling military hero. Addressing the tiny child, the monarch directly asks Miss Celeste if she objects to this sudden marriage. Without missing a beat, Celeste firmly agrees and vows to truly cherish the royal marriage. Her abusive aunt violently flinches, frantically asking the young girl if she understands what marriage means. The king silently observes the highly tense interaction with narrow, calculating eyes. Celeste cleverly weaponizes her cruel aunt's earlier strict command to simply answer yes. The older woman's prior threatening orders to remain quiet and agreeable vividly echo in Celeste's mind. Turning her blank gaze confidently toward the king, the 10-year-old girl maintains her absolute perfect composure. The king remarks with amusement that she has clearly received a highly refined noble education. Celeste politely confirms that her adoptive parents successfully raised her to behave fittingly for a noble daughter. The wicked aunt seethes in silent fury, completely trapped by her very own cruel instructions. The king smiles down at the unlikely couple, highly amused by the brilliantly swift political maneuvering. The massive throne room watches in absolute stunned silence as the fateful engagement is officially finalized. The monarch loudly praises the girl's strong resolve and expresses eager anticipation for House Ainsworth's future. Hazeldine glances back cautiously at his tiny, fiercely determined new fiancé. The newly titled Earl Ainsworth rises proudly from his formal bow, his grim destiny fundamentally changed forever. Celeste quietly reflects that this exact moment marks when Lord Hazeldine officially reclaimed the fallen Ainsworth title. Later in a quiet sunlit courtyard, the massive general stands entirely alone deep in thought. A tiny, determined figure quickly approaches his towering military frame from behind. He turns sharply upon hearing the footsteps, his heavy cape swishing loudly through the cool air. Looking downward, he finds his tiny new bride standing bravely before his massive boots. A remarkably soft smile breaks his usually stern expression as he gently greets the young girl. The deeply intimidating hero respectfully extends a massive, gloved hand toward the small child. Celeste gazes up at him brightly, her youthful eyes wide with profound hope and immense relief. Smiling warmly at her new protector, she formally asks him to take care of her from now on. Completely flustered by her adorable sincerity, the fearsome general nervously stammers a quick agreement. The two unlikely allies stand happily united in the sun, fully prepared to face their newly rewritten future. A peaceful atmosphere settles over the immediate aftermath of the chaotic royal ceremony. The imposing colonel and his tiny new bride walk quietly away from the bustling throne room. Sunlight spills through the tall glass windows as they traverse the quiet palace corridors. Hazeldine gently breaks the silence, asking if they should talk before returning to her foster parents. Celeste gazes up at him in quiet surprise, deeply touched by his highly considerate offer. They step outside into the beautiful gardens, breathing in the fresh air of their secured freedom. The massive general adjusts his stride, trying carefully to match the tiny footsteps of the young girl. He casts a cautious glance downward, acutely aware of the drastic height difference between them. Celeste struggles slightly to keep pace with his naturally long and commanding military strides. She quickly quickens her steps, absolutely determined not to be a burden to her new protector. Noticing her physical struggle, Hazeldine abruptly halts his massive frame right on the garden path. He turns back toward her with a look of genuine concern crossing his hardened features. He awkwardly apologizes for walking too fast, admitting he is completely unaccustomed to escorting children. Catching her breath, Celeste quickly shakes her head and insists she should be the one apologizing. A gentle breeze rustles the courtyard, momentarily easing the awkward tension between the unlikely pair. Blushing slightly, the towering military hero awkwardly mutters that the entire situation is rather embarrassing. Seeking to ease his discomfort, Celeste warmly compliments his stunning uniform and matching blue cloak. Taken aback by the genuine praise, he blinks in surprise and quietly questions her kind words. He awkwardly fumbles for a response, silently wondering how to properly compliment a 10-year-old girl. Sighing softly, he admits he cannot find the right words to properly return her kind compliment. He gestures gently toward her elegant attire, finally offering a highly practical piece of advice. He warns her that if she keeps swaying while walking, her lovely dress will inevitably get dirty. Celeste stops swaying immediately, looking down at her elaborate skirts with a newfound carefulness. She nods respectfully, taking his practical advice to heart as they continue their peaceful stroll. Sensing the immense weight of their new reality, he remarks that incredibly busy days lie ahead. He humbly admits that as a former commoner, he must learn extensively about land matters and noble duties. Staring ahead thoughtfully, he casually wishes aloud for someone to help him navigate unfamiliar aristocratic rules. He specifies his desperate need for someone genuinely well-versed in the complex affairs of the nobility. Celeste smoothly suggests he ask Dwayne Cornelius Shringham for assistance with his daunting new responsibilities. Startled by the specific name, Hazeldine asks if she means the prestigious son of the Duke. She confidently confirms the identity, masking the fact that she has not technically met him yet. He narrows his eyes slightly, half-jokingly questioning if this specific recommendation comes from her mysterious foresight. Scoffing at the idea, he wonders aloud why he would ever ask the most clueless noble for help. Celeste defends the Duke's son, brightly describing Lord Shringham as a remarkably cheerful person. She insists he is highly cultured and possesses a demeanor perfectly befitting a true noble lord. She adds that the 6th-ranked beast user would make an ideal peer for him to consult. Still highly skeptical, Hazeldine points out that she is already deeply familiar with aristocratic society herself. Refusing to back down, she firmly insists that the Duke's son is someone he can absolutely trust. Noticing her strong endorsement, he observes that she seems to get along incredibly well with the young noble. Her expression sours slightly as she mutters that Dwayne is like a very annoying little brother. Hazeldine casually dismisses formal language regarding Shringham, noting they frequently dine together as simple drinking buddies. He gently admits his friend isn't exactly a stellar role model and prefers to avoid introductions. The imposing general halts his massive stride and gazes down softly at his tiny new fiancée. Celeste looks up at him with wide, curious eyes as they stand quietly in the sunlit gardens. Shifting the topic entirely, Hazeldine gently asks her what kind of house she would like to live in. He notes the sudden marriage guarantees her escape, but warns his current house only fits one bed. Celeste thoughtfully requests a small garden, reasoning that the stellar beasts would be quite happy with that. Hazeldine gently corrects her, insisting he wants to know her personal desires rather than the beast's needs. Blushing slightly, she imagines a cozy room with a balcony where she could sit and stargaze. The massive general smiles warmly and praises her quiet vision as a truly lovely idea. A sudden, deliberate rustle nearby violently interrupts their peaceful and private moment. Hazeldine sharply turns his head, his hardened military gaze locking onto an approaching figure. Celeste gasps softly as she immediately recognizes the deeply intimidating and highly dangerous newcomer. The royal crown prince emerges completely casually from the dense foliage of the palace gardens. An attendant officially announces the sudden and imposing arrival of His Royal Highness. The prince smirks playfully, congratulating the newly minted general on their highly coincidental meeting. Turning his sharp gaze downward, the prince greets the marquis's daughter and remarks on their first encounter. Celeste curtsies flawlessly and politely expresses her profound honor at meeting the young royal. The prince smoothly waves off the strict formalities and casually asks if they were enjoying a stroll. Hazeldine firmly confirms they were admiring roses while discussing their newly shared future together. The royal smile thins slightly as he admits his genuine surprise that the general accepted the reward. Unfazed by the subtle jab, Hazeldine calmly states he had no reason to refuse His Majesty's grant. The prince arches a brow, probing to see if the commoner was secretly hoping for a noble title. Hazeldine dismisses the value of titles, noting they only bring burdensome responsibilities in a lineage-obsessed society. However, he proudly declares he has no regrets because his rank grants him power to protect. The prince's eyes darken noticeably as he confesses his personal distaste for how events unfolded today. Masking his deep irritation, the royal praises the general's frankness and looks forward to their future cooperation. Staring directly at Celeste, the prince dangerously claims he would have stopped the forced marriage. A heavy, tense silence stretches endlessly as the young royal intensely scrutinizes the tiny bride. Stepping back gracefully, the prince lightly concludes that his deep concerns were apparently unfounded. He tactfully excuses himself, noting it is improper to interrupt a private moment between engaged fiancés. The crown prince turns away and formally takes his leave from the newly allied couple. Celeste trembles silently in absolute terror as the monstrous royal finally disappears from view. Hazeldine notices her violent shaking and gently attempts to comfort the panicked child. Panic floods her mind as she frantically asks if their life-saving marriage might be cancelled. She desperately points out that marrying a child is hardly an equal reward compared to titles. The crushing fear of being abandoned to her cruel family completely overwhelms the young girl's mind. Hazeldine bluntly warns her that the extinct Ainsworth name currently holds absolutely no real political power. He asks her to critically imagine what would happen if he married into a truly powerful house. He reassures her that since her Tamer abilities remain hidden, her abusive family cannot stop her escape. Hazeldine bluntly explains that their sudden marriage is merely a convenient excuse for the Goldings to discard their adopted daughter. Celeste gazes up at him nervously, her voice trembling slightly as she softly calls out his commanding name. The imposing general gently interrupts her doubts, reminding her that he promised to completely accept her exactly as she is. A heavy wave of guilt washes over her as she tearfully apologizes for reverting to her deeply selfish mindset. He softly advises her not to shoulder that burden, prompting her to fiercely vow to become a true asset. She gasps softly in surprise as his massive, gloved hand gently lands on top of her young head. Praising her immense bravery during the overwhelming day, he proudly suggests they finally head back to her home. The peaceful narrative violently shifts to a chaotic battlefield where exhausted soldiers desperately announce the arrival of delayed reinforcements. A furious soldier grabs the newly arrived commander, angrily demanding to know why they completely ignored the distress call. Scanning the blooded devastation, a stern officer urgently demands to know the exact location of the province's governor. A heavily wounded survivor weakly calls out to the captain, his voice completely hollowed by the horrific slaughter. The battered soldier lowers his head in profound defeat, grimly confirming that the governor was tragically killed in action. Shock ripples through the surviving ranks as someone quickly questions the devastating absence of the commanding general. Absorbing the catastrophic report, the stoic officer nods grimly and curtly dismisses the highly traumatized soldier. A sharp voice suddenly echoes across the military encampment, loudly calling out for the prestigious Major Shringham. The cheerful major turns around with a wide grin, casually greeting Phil as he arrives on the bustling scene. Shringham silently analyzes his stoic friend, a deeply knowing glint flashing in his sharp, aristocratic eyes. The major smirks playfully, loudly interrogating Phil about where he managed to find such an incredibly young bride. Unfazed by the relentless teasing, Phil flatly points out that the well-connected noble already knows the exact details. Shringham erupts into mischievous laughter, loudly mocking the dark rumors claiming the general harbors an obsession with children. Phil crosses his massive arms defensively, scoffing bitterly at the absolutely absurd and highly insulting palace gossip. Shringham enthusiastically suggests throwing a massive celebration for the wedding, but Phil instantly shoots the festive idea down. Leaning in with political curiosity, the Major seriously asks how the powerful Golding family reacted to the arrangement. Phil cynically explains her dowry is an extinct earldom, proving the family just wanted to quickly dump her. Shringham ironically remarks that noble titles legally belong to the state, sharing Phil's absolute disgust for the transaction. He bitterly notes that high society treats children exactly like adults, sarcastically praising the Marquis for their ruthless efficiency. Shifting back to a lighter tone, the Major curiously inquires about the exact date of the upcoming wedding ceremony. Phil bluntly reveals the ceremony is completely cancelled because his tiny bride believes she looks terrible in formal dresses. A brief memory flashes of the 10-year-old girl cheerfully expressing her absolute adoration for beautiful, sparkly objects. Despite loving pretty things, Celeste firmly rejected the grand ceremony, insisting a wedding gown would entirely clash with her age. The cheerful conversation abruptly dies as a deeply somber shadow suddenly falls over Shringham's aristocratic face. Staring out over the heavily fortified camp, Phil grimly announces that one of their fellow military comrades was killed. Shringham gently asks if the general was close to the fallen soldier, prompting a quiet, regretful denial. Phil solemnly clarifies that he simply recognized the tragic victim's name while reviewing the devastating casualty reports. The Duke's son sadly admits that every death violently triggers his deep guilt over failing to heal more people. Gripping his arm tightly, the noble healer confesses his immense helplessness often leaves him completely disgusted with himself. Seeking spiritual solace amidst the immense carnage, a solemn voice gently suggests they pray for guidance from the stars. The war-torn soldiers silently raise their exhausted heads toward the dark, starlit sky in absolute reverence. Countless brilliant constellations shimmer intensely above the blooded earth, projecting a silent aura of magical power. The dazzling cosmos stand in stark contrast to the brutal, unforgiving reality of the humans suffering below. The scene shifts to a quiet new residence as the dust of recent events finally settles. Shringham immediately criticizes the new property, loudly complaining that the space feels far too cramped. Phil defends the standalone home, arguing it is actually relatively spacious for a city residence. The general warns the spoiled noble not to compare the newly purchased house to his massive family estate. Phil grimly explains the recently restored title is highly unstable and completely unreliable for inheritance. He lists off crushing new burdens like estate management, property issues, and heavy administrative costs. Leaning forward with a heavy sigh, Phil firmly reminds his friend that their money is absolutely not unlimited. He adds that larger estates require more servants and he deeply despises having strangers inside his home. A brief silence hangs in the air as the massive weight of his new noble responsibilities sets in. The exhausted soldier admits he struggles to find trustworthy people to manage the fief's sprawling lands. Seizing the perfect opportunity, Celeste brightly speaks up and confidently offers to handle those daunting tasks herself. Phil and Shringham stare at the tiny 10-year-old girl in absolute stunned silence. A sudden knock at the door sharply interrupts the quiet room before Phil can properly respond. A subordinate steps inside and politely apologizes for interrupting Major Shringham's private meeting. The soldier announces the escort has arrived, prompting the cheerful Major to casually swipe an item and flee. Left alone with his tiny new manager, the massive general lets out a heavy, exhausted sigh.